Hello, hello, and welcome into the USL show. Back again for another Tuesday, back again talking all the big games. Super happy to be joined by Alan and Ryan tonight. So we'll start with you, Alan. How we doing?
Great. I just flew back from Denver and unfortunately did not see any soccer. I saw a bunch of marching band, but I did notice that Colorado Springs was in town playing, and I was like, oh, I kind of wanted to go see it, but ended up being a good game we'll talk about later. And then saw some Tormenta players wandering through the airport on Sunday, and so I tried to pick
Oh,
out,
fun.
see if any of them if I knew any of them, but I didn't recognize any of them off the bat, and so I didn't want to walk up to them and be like, "Hey, I'm this nerdy guy who talks about soccer on the internet." So they were traveling. They looked all right. So I was USL adjacent this weekend.
I once ran into RGV at the airport. And yeah, it's the kind of same thing of like I said hi to one or two guys, but felt like it's probably weird for me to be like, yeah, I'm a massive fan of RGV. So yeah, awkwardness uniting the pod. And how about you, Ryan? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I've had to deal with some apartment issues over the past 2 weeks, so it's felt like it's been a while since I've been on the show. But happy to have at least have gotten all of that sorted out, and just that apartment maintenance is not the most fun of issues to be dealing with lately.
Yeah, happy to have you back. Happy that you are getting it sorted out. Before we get going in earnest, I don't know if we're doing out of time outfitters anymore, but let's go ahead and shout them out anyway because they're good folks doing good things. Otherwise, I think we should shout out some patrons. And I will pull up that list because it is getting long. So thank you to John Hunt, Frank Anthony, Aaron J., Christopher Cohn, Harry Austin, John Fuller, Michael Fuchs, Joshua Duder, Noah Telford, Alberto Aguilar, Jeremy Churchman, Stephen Howard, Rian Lacara, Tim Knox, NF Reg 30, MOS, Kunal Patel, all of the Hedgehog, and Andrew Towsley. All of you are so appreciated. We really like to give the shout out to anybody who gets on Patreon and supports what we're doing here. We also want to shout out Goals TV, who's been a fantastic partner for the show and for really all independent coverage of lower division soccer. So, all the partners, all the supporters, loving that you are here for us. So, before we get into some game action, I think there's sort of an elephant in the room to talk about relative to Fort Lauderdale United in the USL Super League. This is a club that I think has played 3 times so far, done quite well on the pitch, and had a good game over the weekend. Set to move into a new stadium that they are pulling together at a former Dolphins training facility. But they are currently sort of being run by the former head of essentially Diddy's creative company. Diddy been in the headlines for a lot of bad reasons recently, and someone who didn't surround himself with people who you necessarily want around the game of women's soccer. And today we saw from Abby Hammer, someone who's a very strong presence, a good reporter in the lower league women's soccer game, discussing that fact that this club is associated with people who you might want around, discussing rumors, and let's emphasize rumors because this is a developing situation, that pay is maybe not forthcoming for some individuals at the club, that there are employees complaining to USL headquarters. It's not what you want to see from a fledgling club in a fledgling league, certainly. So, love to get some thoughts from either of you.
I think with these, we just need to be obviously cautious with the veracity of claims. We've heard some stuff in the past around players not getting paid and who their the sources of those might be, and some of them turn out to be true, and you hold those teams accountable. Obviously, it's very worrying, especially with some of the news that's come out at NWSL and their lack of response to those. I think holding USL accountable if these allegations end up being accurate and then USL League not taking swift action, I think is problematic. I think USL needs to learn from the NWSL and be obviously as transparent as possible, and respond to these as well as they can. But coming from a job that deals with HR and deals with complaints, sometimes these things do take a while to be investigated, right? You do your investigations, you do your due diligence, And so it's not surprising that there hasn't been something from USL, and particularly if it involves personnel, they might not be able to give tons of information. But let's not kid ourselves. If USL wants to make themselves look better, there's ways of divulging information about said interviews or said responses, or even put out a release afterwards. Hey, we've done this. This is what we were able to find. So I'm hoping these allegations are not nearly as bad as they seem. But this is not, like you said before, it's not what you want to see from kind of a newer league, or a newer part of the league. And definitely the, firing their staff, the, players not getting paid. Like, the guilty by association thing is problematic, but is, who knows? But I think focusing on the stuff that is like player related and front office staff related, I think those are the very real accusations that might have some implications.
Yeah, and it's going to be a situation that's obviously still developing as we try and follow the story and try and get all the facts out there that we can. But like Alan had mentioned, that coming at it from the perspective of the players to ensure that they're being treated properly, that they are getting paid, that they're being compensated for their work is going to be one of the most prioritizing things here that they need to focus on. And I guess from a more league perspective, they should at least take a more proactive approach, talk about as much as they can, be as transparent as they can with this entire process to ensure that all the proper steps are being taken to protect the players in this instance. And I guess to connect it to a wider league, it's a little worrying because we've seen how like Brooklyn FC has approached their season as well. To start that, the league may not be properly vetting all of the ownership groups that are at least running these teams. So it's a developing story that I hope the players are being prioritized here.
Yeah, and what you mentioned with the ownership and the readiness or lack thereof from some of the organizations involved, there was a real pressure for the Super League to hit that 8-team floor coming into 2024, right? Like, there are great intentions to add a lot of clubs associated with known quantities from the championship, from League One. But organizations like Brooklyn, like Fort Lauderdale, they're new to the scene. They've not really done this before. So I think it added a degree of risk, and we're possibly seeing the downside now. I'm still bullish that hopefully they're finding their footing, and even if there are kind of grave things going wrong at the moment, hopefully they can correct and start to establish the culture you'd want to see. Yeah, so interesting times for sure. And we'll pivot from them to Northern Colorado real quickly, because that's kind of a natural bridge. But also just to say, next week, if you're tuning in, we're going to have head coach Eamon Zayed from the Hailstorm on to kind of hype up what's coming with the Jägermeister Cup. They had a tougher result over the weekend, but we're not going to focus on that. Instead, Greenville Triumph, who have gone through the ringer lately, got a resounding 5-2 win over the Chattanooga Red Wolves. Something that I think Triumph fans had been crying out for, really wanting to see as a response from their club to stop what's been a very difficult offensive spell in particular. So yeah, let's get some League One thoughts in the mix.
Yeah, I thought early on, Greenville might be unlucky to only be or unlucky to only be up 2-1. I think that halftime score maybe gave Chattanooga a little bit of hope. Some decent bounces, I guess, go Chattanooga's way, and or in keeping the ball out. But it was a really nice second half, a really well-deserved hat trick. And probably a sigh of relief for Greenville fans. And hopefully this starts form, right? Your form is only as good as your last game. So hopefully this builds some momentum. And maybe Chattanooga, they're taking a look at some of this and finding some nuggets that they can pull from. Because like I said, being down and fighting back to get to 2-1 before halftime was quite a feat for Chattanooga. I felt Greenville was really taking it to them. So a really good win for Greenville after a season of maybe a long disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, this is excuse me. This is a Greenville team that's entering this game who didn't win any of their last 6 matches coming into this match, and then they come out with a 5-goal performance. The last time they had scored 5 goals in a game was the middle of the 2023 season, which also happened to come up against Chattanooga. So this is really the type of result that I think Greenville has been looking for, and just kind of like moving forward for their next 2 games, it provides an excellent opportunity to really turn around their form and really cement their place in the USL One playoff picture. They're hosting Fuego and Lexington, the 2 teams currently at the bottom of the league right now, and it's an opportunity to really provide a lot more gap between the 7th place team of Northern Colorado on 25 points, and then try and attack Omaha, who's currently leading the league on 32. You have the Triumph right there in the middle on 27, and it's an opportunity to try and get back into this home playoff picture.
Yeah, and this was really a return to form for Greenville, a team that hadn't scored 2 goals in a game since late June, which, given how they started this season, was kind of a crazy drop-off for them. So much of what went right against Chattanooga was the return of Leo Castro for me. I kind of started as the number 9, but was seen dropping deep, holding up possession so often. And the Red Wolves didn't know how to respond. Like, the defense kept chasing Castro, and it gave up this space over the top in behind that Lyam MacKinnon didn't even need to be the receiver. He was just staying in good positions. His teammates, mostly on the right side, were making the runs they needed to break through. And it was a lot of tap-ins from MacKinnon, which, I mean, hey, you take that anytime you can get it. There's a reason he's in the Golden Boot race. It's because he can score in a lot of ways. I think structurally as well, the Triumph were kind of back to the thing where they attack with the back 3 and push Tyler Polak up on that left side, but sink him back into a back 4 defensively. Like, again, that's what the Triumph do when they're at their best. They're confident in taking the game to people. Chattanooga is just weird. Like, they're in the mix for a playoff spot. They may well end up going and getting it. At the same time, they've allowed like 10 more expected goals than anybody in League One. They've got the worst goal difference than anybody in League One if you're combining all competitions. In this game, they almost gave up 4 expected goals to Greenville. And yes, the red card matters. Like, yes, losing Toby Janohope, who's kind of been a starter at center back since they signed him over the summer, that's important. But for a club that's struggled with injuries, has felt rudderless for a lot of 2024, it's kind of an argument against League One's playoff expansion, right? Like, why is a team like Chattanooga being rewarded for, frankly, being the worst statistical side in the division and still having a shot at things?
I mean, they've lost 5 games in a row in the league, and they're still just 2 points out of a playoff spot. If you look through their schedule, you see so many games where they've scored in this match, but then still happen to end up losing. I think they may lead the league in number of games that they've scored in and still couldn't get a victory or even a draw out of. It's really insane that it looks like within League One this year that we have 7 really high quality teams, and then someone is going to sneak in as the 8th seed of this playoffs, if they even really deserve it to be there or not.
And how mad would people be when that team sneaks in and then goes on a little bit of run, a la the Oakland Roots, their first season, where your goalkeeper gets super hot and you force the eventual champions that year, or was that the year Orange County won, where they ended up going to penalty kicks against Oakland? If my memory serves me correct, it all blends together. But I mean, that's what you're inviting kind of with this playoff format. But I also think maybe that makes it a little bit more exciting, but I doubt it. Like, I think with the way the top end of the League One is playing, that would be an absolute stunner. But yeah, it's one of those, like, if you keep it at 6, then you feel like there's a 7th team that gets kind of on the outside looking in. But maybe that's the point of the playoffs, right? Is to put it at a spot where maybe there's one too many teams instead of or one not enough teams instead of one too many teams. That way that first week is kind of a whatever week. But to end on a more positive note, I mean, Greenville, this is the time to kind of turn your season and get hot and go on a nice little run. And for as bad as it is for them to be that close touching point to, the top of the league, is going to be exciting for those Greenville fans. And this gives them some hope that there is a streak in the future. And maybe, you go on a bad run and maybe you catch fire and go on a nice run into the playoffs.
Yeah, and just quickly on the playoff format thing, I think like relative to the introduction of the Jägermeister Cup, and you're getting less league games, it is an interesting argument of, okay, we're adding the cup, so maybe we can have a smaller playoff field in the league, right? Like these teams have their fun in the cup competition, so that makes up for it, versus like, oh, we're adding a cup, we're losing games, we should add more playoff teams because that's fair, or like less of a sample size. Clearly, that's the route that League One decided to go. I tend to be a small playoff guy. Like, I prefer if it's just a top four, the best teams going at it. But fun either way. It's an interesting conundrum, and I wonder what that was like in the smoke-filled rooms as they decided. Yeah, well, we will get to some playoff contenders in the championship now. First and foremost, I want to kick off with Tampa Bay going up against the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. A game where the Rowdies were down 1-0, came back, took them a while, but they got a huge 2-1 win against the Riverhounds. Something that, given Tampa Bay's form, they really needed. Do you think this is the sort of thing that's going to be able to kind of push the Rowdies up into contention again? And just general thoughts on what this game means?
I mean, I think it was a very emotional game and very important in that sense. I'm not sure the long-term effects of this. Maybe even a little lucky that they get that second goal by that deflection. I mean, I think maybe that ball goes in regardless, but I think the deflection is a twist of the knife into the Riverhounds, who maybe go to outlaying and are excited to maybe get a point out of it, and then at the last minute, no. But Fernandez looked great coming on as a second half substitute. I know that was like a big moment for Tampa Bay, and so I think it was just kind of one of those. I think one of the announcers it's like a script for Hollywood kind of deal. He comes back on and scores the winning goal against I don't want to say an Eastern rival, but kind of an Eastern rival, right? Pittsburgh's always been around, and so I think this can be a catalyst, but I'm not so sure. I think maybe having a couple games against teams that maybe aren't as formative in Hartford and Rhode Island coming up, maybe they can put together a nice little run. Having North Carolina Indy 11 at home to end the season, I think there may be some external factors that make it look like this is kind of a more substantial victory. But when you're writing a great story, I think this is, if Tampa Bay ends up, reaching those heights, I think this is a game people point to. I think if they kind of maintain trajectory, I think people still talk about this game, but maybe not in that big picture of, the romanticism of the Tampa Bay Rowdy season.
Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, this was a huge victory for Tampa Bay. It really provided them another 4-point gap between Detroit and their fourth spot and 6 points back to fifth. So I still think the Rowdies are going to be a home playoff team. And with 10 points to Charleston, I think it's very much to say that they're not going to catch the top two. In fact, they still have to play Charleston and Louisville away in the remaining games this schedule, including Charleston away this week. It's still a very tricky schedule to kind of end the year, and we've seen it in seasons past that you don't want to go into the playoffs without any momentum. You want to go in riding a hot streak and have that carry you through the postseason. So this is a huge win for Tampa Bay, a team that up until now was entering this match with just one win in their last 5, and it was a team that was actually very streaky in their results. Like, they began the year with 7 matches unbeaten, and then they've not had back-to-back, they had results that were all just back-to-back with each other, kind of remaining the year up until that Miami victory that was sandwiched between 2 defeats. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Rowdies kind of finish out the year, but I do expect them to be a home playoff team.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you, like level sitting at the home playoff. position for them, which granted kind of wasn't a given, just considering their form, considering where they were at coming into this game. And you watch the first 45 minutes, you'd probably think Pittsburgh was going to sail to a classic like Bob Lilly 1-0 win. I thought the man mark that they were applying to Lewis Hilton was incredibly effective at stopping what Tampa Bay wanted to do. Really tried to force their defenders to create, which, given the injuries we've seen for the Rowdies, like having a rookie in Zane Bubb in the back line wasn't what they wanted to be doing strategically as they built out. And yeah, the Fernandez sub absolutely changed the entire demeanor of the matchup. That's a player who won the MVP award in 2022. So mobile, so good with the ball at his feet. And he kind of played underneath Cal Jennings and Manuel Arteaga. He took attention away from them. Like the defense had to split where they were looking, what they were focusing on. And Fernandez's ability to find touches in the hole, to dribble past opponents, made everything tick for Tampa Bay in a way that, combined with Pittsburgh probably getting a little bit too defensive, let the Rowdies do what they needed to do to get over the line. And I think, Ryan, you're right to point out, like, the schedule ahead is not going to get any easier. Like, it's still a proving ground for this team. But between Fernandez, between the introduction of Ben Bender on loan, they have the tools now to go on and do the job. And I'm excited to see if they can continue the momentum that they started to build, at least against the Riverhounds. On the Pittsburgh side, we'll get into their playoff hopes a little bit later, because I do want to do that kind of buy and sell. But let's switch over to Colorado Springs, where this was an interconference game between the Switchbacks and the Charleston Battery, a Battery team that I'm repping right now, and a Battery team that has been playing well despite the absence of Aaron Malloy. And they get, I'm not going to say slaughtered by the Switchbacks, but this was a game that Colorado Springs really controlled from back to front. So is Colorado Springs like really a contender in the West at this point?
I mean, almost yes by default, I guess. There's like a lot of kind of averagey teams, and so to be above average is meaning that you're going to be contending in the West right now, particularly for a home playoff game. I mean, they're level on points with Sacramento, but Sacramento's got 2 games in hand. But I think it was a really interesting performance. They were really direct. I thought there were some opportunities even later in the match where guys were, taking shots instead of playing the ball to a more open player. Could have been 3-0 with, an offside that was really close. So this was a really kind of dominant performance. But I wonder if it was more Charleston knew that there's a gap to Tampa Bay. This wasn't a game that they needed. It's interconference, so there's not really a whole lot of like tiebreaker implications. And so maybe they took their foot off the gas a little bit against the Colorado Springs team, maybe just kind of overlooking them depending on, looking at the rest of the games Charleston has coming up. And this is a Colorado Springs team that, short of like Sacramento's their last game, they don't have a huge game coming up that's going to really tax them, right? They got El Paso, Loudoun, OC, who, depends on which team shows up. San Antonio, who's been not great, but maybe getting better than Monterey Bay. Like, this is a Colorado Springs team who can, if you weren't paying attention to the standings and base this on past performance, I think you would be surprised that they're in, home playoff contention. And I do think it's a team that will end up hosting a home playoff game, because I think there's enough teams that are going to beat each other up, and they're going to be all right.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a Switchbacks team who have won their last 4 games. They had a stretch earlier in the season where they won 5 in a row, and if they're going to get a result against El Paso, which we probably are safe to assume that they will this weekend, and that would make it a separate 5-game winning streak that they have. And Alan, you had mentioned it right on the dot that if you're looking at their remaining schedule, only 2 teams left on their schedule right now is currently occupying. 3 teams left on their schedule right now is currently occupying a playoff spot. and none of those teams are currently above 8th in their conference right now. This is a very favorable schedule for a Colorado Springs team, who I think on the final day is going to pip Sacramento to at least 2nd in the Western Conference. And if you're going to look back at some of their previous performances in the 2022 playoffs that the Switchbacks had made, they won both of their home playoff games there before they eventually lost to San Antonio in the West Final. With looking at the Switchbacks team, who is currently the best team in the Western Conference at home this season on 32 points, only Charleston and Louisville are better at home this year. If the Switchbacks are at home, it's going to be very tough to pick against them in this postseason.
Yeah, I'm kind of all in on Colorado Springs right now. Like, outside of Louisville, there might not be another team that I am more hyped up about in terms of what they're doing. Like this 4-game winning streak now with wins over Tampa Bay, Tulsa, and Memphis. And now you add in Charleston, they've scored 13 goals across the 4 games. They've been almost error-free defensively. Really, when they've allowed goals, it's because they're up 3 already and just taking their foot off the gas. The press was so impressive against Charleston. In an average game, like Aaron Malloy is going to take about 100 touches if he's in the central midfield. Both central midfielders for the Battery combined for about 90 in this match. Like, the Switchbacks just denied every pattern that this team relies on to create chances. Charleston only got 6 touches in the box. They only put up 5 shot attempts. It was their worst offensive showing of the year, and that starts and ends because of what James Chambers set up for Colorado Springs. Whenever they win back possession, of course, like, you get Fjellberg, you get Tyreek McGee. They've got like a real kind of a stable of attacking options who can beat you in a million ways. With Justin Dillon, who's now starting over Ronaldo Damas pretty regularly, holding up possession, allowing plays to develop around him. And this is a player in Dillon who kind of seemed lost with El Paso earlier in the season and was identified as someone who could go and add something to a contender. Lo and behold, El Paso really could use a number 9 right now, but yeah, sorry to Phil on that one. Colorado Springs is benefiting and kind of doing the job. I do want to say, and we'll get to a question from the chat in a minute, are either of you worried about Charleston after this game?
I don't know if I'm worried about Charleston because of this game. I think that they're okay. I think this is, I mean, we're allowed to have a bad run of form. I think Charleston still is averaging less than a goal per game allowed, and have scored a ton of goals. So I think that they can figure this out. Maybe not the run of form you want if like the playoffs started today, but I think that there's still some hope for Charleston. That they have, some tough matchups, but I think they have some teams that they can, pull together some good looks and feel confident going into the playoffs. So I'm not super worried about Charleston. I wouldn't pick them as my favorite out of the East. But I do think, if you're talking about maintaining, I think they have a big enough gap that they don't have to stress about losing a home playoff match. They've already clinched the playoffs. And so maybe it's, getting some guys right. Maybe it's, managing minutes, managing load right now. And, at that altitude, I walked around the Denver airport and I was winded. So I can only imagine what it's like kind of playing in that environment where maybe you're not the most motivated to win. So I'm not super worried about it. It does show that Colorado Springs is a tough place to play. And that is something to keep in mind out of the West, is that home field advantage might, like Ryan said, might be super important for Colorado Springs because of how different they look on the road to home. But yeah, I'm not super worried about Charleston right now. I think they're fine.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that you would have to be a little concerned about the Battery is just kind of what is their motivation towards the rest of the season. Obviously, you want to end the year on a high, but if you look at where they are currently in the table, I don't think they're worried about Tampa Bay catching up to them. And if you look ahead for Louisville has 2 games in hand and is already 6 points in front of Charleston. So it still even seems like first in the Eastern Conference is out of reach. But one thing the Battery do have going for them in these remaining 5 games is that 4 of them come at home, which is going to be massive for trying to build in that momentum towards the end of the year. So if they can just recapture that form and then get into the postseason, I would still feel confident that the Battery are going to win about at least one playoff game, and depending on who the 3-6 matchup is going to be, potentially 2.
Yeah, I suspect it'll be a Tampa Bay rematch, well, assuming the Rowdies get out of the first round, and that'll be full of storylines. So before we move on, good question from the chat, from, I believe it's Andrew Towsley. I don't know. It's hard with screen names in here. But so just curious, lots of talk the last few years that the Western Conference was better than the Eastern Conference. Is this still true this year, looking at the cross-conference matches? I don't have any numbers to throw out. I have lots of vibes to consider. I would tell you that the top of the East is stronger than the West. I would tell you that the East, top to bottom, is stronger than the West. I think there are 11 teams in the East, and Miami is not one of them, that can go out and compete in any given week and genuinely beat anybody. I would take someone like a North Carolina, for instance, who's sitting in 11th place, over a fair number of Western clubs. You throw in the fact that Louisville City is kind of the shining star of the league, the undisputed best team out there. That weighs considerably for me when I'm balancing this question.
Yeah, I think, if this was a couple years ago, I think it's a different question. I think this year particularly, I think we've seen a shift back to the Eastern Conference being maybe a little bit more dominant. There was a time where it was Eastern Conference had like 3 really good teams, and then, Western Conference was the strongest top to bottom. I think it's a little bit the backwards now, where maybe there's 2 or 3 really strong teams in the West, and then the East is just packed. Now the East also happens to have like a couple dynamite teams as well, where maybe in older Western conferences that wasn't the case. It was really good teams, but maybe not dominant teams. But I think a New Mexico side that is good, but I wouldn't say is like amazing, is the top of the West. I think that just shows that maybe Western Conference is like a lot of teams right in that same quality, if you will. And yeah, I think you're right on, John, that I think that as a guy who would die if he said the Eastern Conference was better than the West. I think it's just right now, I think there's a lot more strong teams in the East. But that doesn't mean that when we go to a final that a Western team can't beat an Eastern team. But I do think, as a conference is concerned, I think you're right. You have Pittsburgh and Hartford all, they're both outside the playoffs. Pittsburgh being outside the playoffs is rather shocking. And, you look on the Western Conference and it's like a lot of teams that you're like, meh about, like just look at the goal differential in the Western Conference. And there's just a lot of teams that maybe are below average this season. And next season teams make changes, and we're talking about an almost different league. So I think that's what makes USL so fun, is that you have these traditional teams, but you have teams like that pop up and down from time to time and surprise you, like a Las Vegas Lights this year.
What I find interesting is the gap between the top of the table and, for the sake of this discussion, let's say 11th in the East and then last in the Western Conference as well, is both a very similar, about 30 points between the team in first and the team at the foot of the league. So it shows that the spread of teams is fairly consistent with each other. But what I always like to do when comparing the two leagues is if you just match up 1v1, 2v2, going down the entire order, just and say who you think will win. I really have to say I think the Eastern Conference comes out with, I would say, about at least 8 wins out of the head-to-head matchups. there. Alan, you had mentioned specifically like Pittsburgh and Hartford are very solid teams currently outside the playoff picture. If you match them up against Tulsa and San Antonio, respectively, I think those are games that the Eastern Conference comes out ahead. If you're looking historically, you have the Players' Shield has been won by an Eastern Conference team in two of the last 3 seasons, which is different from having 3 consecutive Western Conference league champions in that time. And it's starting to look like we'll have 3 out of the last 4 Players' Shield winners being from the Eastern Conference as well. So I think once you get into a postseason at knockout soccer, anything can definitely happen. But within the league this year, I think it's a right assessment to say that the top of the Eastern Conference is better than the Western Conference right now.
And it is interesting to think about a team like New Mexico United, who they've lost to Louisville. They just went into Detroit and lost over the weekend. I have convinced myself about New Mexico. Like, this is a good team and a team that deserves a lot of respect. But when push comes to shove and that's the top of your table side, I don't know if it inspires confidence in this specific debate. And then when you throw in the fact that like Sacramento has been relatively inconsistent by their standards, it's a very down year for Phoenix, a very down year for San Antonio. You could say the same thing about Orange County. It just seems that kind of a reset year for a lot of teams in the West versus East in terms of like the arc of the club over a couple of years. A lot of teams have found their stride and entered an era where they just feel more comfortable. So yeah, that's where I am at with this. I think that's a nice little bridge into what I want to talk about next in terms of the playoff race. So I want to start off in the East. We're not going to care about Louisville, Charleston, realistically Tampa Bay. Those teams, 2 of them have locked. Like Louisville City is in, and they're very close to clinching a home field game if they didn't already. Charleston and Tampa Bay, we believe in. That leaves, and again, apologies to Miami. That's all I'm ever apologizing for. Good news to them, though, because they're selling season ticket deposits for 2025, which was the real big question for Miami. So thank God they're existing.
It's the Pitbull effect.
That is the Pitbull effect. But that leaves us 8 teams vying for 5 spots. So right now in the table, it's Detroit in 4th, then Indy, then Birmingham, then Loudoun, then Rhode Island. And then below the cut line, you've got Pittsburgh, Hartford, North Carolina. So I just want to go blow by blow. Are we buying the stock? Are we selling the stock for getting into the playoffs? We'll start off with Detroit City, fresh off that win over New Mexico. Alan, Ryan, whoever wants to start, do you think Detroit is getting in?
I'll go yes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it feels like, I mean, especially with what Laurent Kessiedou is doing on the left wing, like he just had the big play to force the penalty against New Mexico. They've still got one of the most elite defenses in the league that we don't talk about quite enough. They're in pretty much for sure. That takes us to my Indy 11, who have had a real sore run of form. They got a big win over the weekend, but it was against El Paso, so it doesn't really count in terms of like the vibes arguments. So Indy, yes, no, buy, sell?
Go ahead, Ryan.
That's a lot of painful looks. Yeah.
I'm going to go with yes, but not in 5th place. I think just looking at their remaining schedule, they do have the fortunate of playing Miami again, which is another opportunity to get 3 points on the board. But you still have Louisville at home. You have to travel to Detroit. You have to travel to Tampa Bay. I think the body of work that Indy 11 had to start the year with that very long unbeaten run has really kind of boosted their spot here. It's almost what I think like what New Mexico was like in 2023, where they had a very great kind of start to the year and then just that kind of coasted them into the postseason. But I would say Indy 11 will be a playoff team, but not in 5th.
I think that's fair. I also think that there's a scenario where like if the season started today, you had 6 games left, Indy might finish second to last in the East. I don't believe in the form at all. I think the formation change has been dumb. I think the signings they made at the roster freeze were quite bad. This is also just my mania as somebody who really thought this season was the year to like get back on the bus. But yeah, I think they're going to squeak in because they did so much of the legwork, but I am not confident about it. So we'll step on down from there to the Birmingham Legion. Kaler's boys, fresh off a 4-2 loss to Loudoun. Buy, sell, and Ryan has rightly pointed out that we can hold if we want to.
I think I'm going to sell Birmingham. I think you're looking at. I think. I mean, the arguments are somewhat similar with Indy 11 as they bank points. Problem is they've given up like as many goals as Indy 11 and have scored less. So I'm not super convinced that they can hold on here. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say if I'm going to pick, because I do think maybe Pittsburgh gets in, so I'm trying to pick one that maybe I'm not super sold on. And so I'm going to go and sell. I'm going to sell Birmingham. I think maybe their form limps along to the end, and maybe they just miss out a la San Antonio a few years ago.
Yeah, I'm leaning more towards sell with Birmingham. If you look at their form just coming in from this past 5 games, that's 4 losses in their last 5, and they were shut out in 3 of those games. Looking ahead, I mean, they still have to travel to Pittsburgh, they host Las Vegas, and they have to travel across the country to Oakland on the final day. I think we enter a scenario where Birmingham, headed into the final day of the season, needs to win that match, and any cross-country trip is going to be difficult for Legion, where I think they just kind of miss out on the end, especially if you're looking at an Oakland team who is quite possibly going to be trying to competing for a home playoff game, but we'll certainly get to the Western Conference buy and sell here in a bit.
Well, Alan has kind of reintroduced the idea that if I want teams to jump into the playoff field, I've got to choose teams to drop out. So I'm retroactively selling Indy just to set the stage on that. Birmingham is a team that is consistently inconsistent. Like at midweek last week, they looked so strong. Getting Tyler Pasher back visibly energized that team offensively. The shape made sense, the structure made sense, and they got a win. And then almost all of this progress went up in the air against Loudoun. And it took a minute because Alex Cornele scored a goal from 60 yards out to give them the lead to start that match. But Loudoun was able to outpossess them, was able to break down the middle with ease as the game went on. It's kind of the nightmare scenario for a Legion team that hangs their hat on having a good structure. I'm holding on them for now, but they're like not a team that's inspiring confidence in me. I'll put it that way. We do have a good question. When do we get the USL show special comparing preseason rankings to the actual table? We don't want to embarrass ourselves like that. So we'll do it eventually, but we'll do it with a lot of shame and our tails tucked between our legs.
We don't want to look at where we put Lexington preseason.
I'll tell you what, on that, and Kaler and I don't ever stop mentioning this, on that League One preview show we did, both of us were very mean to Lexington and very correct. So we're hanging our hats on that. Back in the table, we have got Loudoun in 7th place. Buy, sell, hold.
I've actually gone with sell on Loudoun. If you just look at their remaining schedule, well, their next 2 games go up against the current Western Conference leaders in New Mexico. Then we go to a team that we've already established to be a very tough place to go play, which is Colorado Springs. Hartford somehow has gotten to 6 games unbeaten, and if they get a result this week, it's going to be their longest ever unbeaten streak in club history.
Wow.
And that's another road match. Loudoun has just 2 more home games. One of those is against Indy 11, and the other is coming up against Pittsburgh, and then they have to travel to Charleston on the final day. I think that's going to be a Charleston team that may not be playing for anything other than pride at that point, but it's still a difficult place to go into and play and try and get a result. I like Loudoun. I mean, it's the people's champions, but if you just look at this remaining schedule, it's arguably one of the toughest schedules in the Eastern Conference right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be my argument about the schedule. The upcoming schedule is tough.
That's an important thing to consider. I just straight up think Loudon is talented enough to get over that hump. I think that they have the midfield. I think the defensive structure is there. Kind of opposite Indy, that they started quite slowly, but I think that they've hit a solid enough patch of form that if they get in the playoffs, they're going to have proven themselves as a team worthy of doing it. So I'm happy to keep Loudon. So that takes us to the last team currently in the playoff field in the form of expansion side, Rhode Island FC.
I feel like I want to hold Rhode Island only because like Koke Vegas and my infatuation with him as a human being.
Yeah.
And also, I want to see an expansion club be successful and get a playoff match, even if it's a road one. So all of my heart is saying I'm going to hold on to Rhode Island. They have some good moments and bad moments. Tons of draws, and so they're a team that a couple good bounces go the right way. They're sitting, battling for a home playoff match, which is wild. So soccer romantic in me wants to hold Rhode Island.
Love it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be in the kind of same boat of just holding on to Rhode Island. Their two biggest Eastern Conference games that they have left in the year is hosting Tampa Bay on October 5th, and then a road game in the penultimate weekend against Charleston. But one thing that I think is going to be very crucial for them is they were the team that got the lucky straw to draw Miami FC on the final day of the year, which if there is a very close playoff picture and they could go into it with, Miami, what's going to be probably a very good chance at 3 points, that really tilts towards Rhode Island's favor.
But think about how fun it would be if Miami played spoiler. Consider. I would have told you for almost all of the year that I'm very in on Rhode Island. These last two games have been a struggle for them. Pittsburgh kind of gave them a dose of their own medicine. Orange County played a kind of like oil and water, very different tactical style, but was able to get the goal, keep them from scoring, get over the line. I don't think that they have the right mix in the midfield right now. I think since the return of Jack Peniotu, who is a very good player and a very talented set piece taker and very skillful, they've not been aligned in a way that I quite think is their best setup. The fact that they have banked up some points, feel like they're a good defensive team matters to me. So I think they stay in, but again, like not feeling great. So now we're going to move on to the three teams that could possibly punch their way up. We'll start with the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, who I will note have played 29 matches more than anybody else. So they're kind of starting at a deficit in a way.
I hope that Pittsburgh makes the playoffs because I need more Bob Lilly throwing a fit on the sideline memes. And so I think with a coach like Lilly, I think he figures out a way to kind of sneak into the playoffs. I don't want to steal Ryan's point about schedule again, but I think they do have a very favorable schedule in the run-in against some teams that they're probably going to get some points off of. I think that the Loudoun game away is going to be super important. Like Loudoun's playing a lot of the teams around them. They're playing Rhode Island, they're playing Pittsburgh, and so I think the couple of those games have like really wild swings for this playoff match, and I just feel that Lilly has enough to sneak in. I'm not convinced they're going to do a ton of damage in the playoffs, but I'm not going to count Lilly out.
Yeah, Pittsburgh has Miami and El Paso still left on their schedule, and it's Bob Lilly. He's a person who could absolutely drag this Pittsburgh Riverhound team into the postseason. And honestly, if they're going to match up against, say, a Louisville, that's a very frustrating first-round matchup for Louisville City. Hey, what I found interesting, if we're going to look at the schedule, if you're going to look at the teams basically from Birmingham down to North Carolina, majority except for Loudoun and I think Hartford, they're playing just one match a week. Loudon and I think Hartford, they have a midweek game somewhere on the remaining schedule. And I think that's going to be huge for rest kind of going forward. So I think Pittsburgh wheels their way into the postseason, but probably no higher than 8th.
I'm just going to sell on Pittsburgh. I think the fact that they've got a shorter runway than everyone else matters. I think the fact that the offense is still so unreliable matters. Like, they're not going to allow goals, but you could see a scenario where they just don't score against Miami because they're not in form that day, or they blow a lead against El Paso just because of bad luck. And they're at the point where every single match kind of has to be 3 points if you want to keep up and want to feel comfortable. I hate to say it because of the way they've come on so strong in the second half of the year, but yeah, picking against the Riverhounds. So we now get to what might be the most interesting team in the East right now. We've mentioned the unbeaten streak for Hartford Athletic. Mamadou Dieng is on a tear at striker. Are we buying Hartford as a playoff team? That's some hemming and hawing.
I mean, I would go. I think if I'm looking through all the spots of selling and buying, I don't know if I have a spot left for them. But I think if my hold with Loudon or Rhode Island, one of those two, doesn't work out, I do think there's a path for Hartford to sneak in, given their run of form, and they might just be a team that sneaks in and goes on a nice little run in the playoffs because they're getting hot at the right time. Some of the matchups maybe aren't the most inspiring. Like 3-0 win against Miami, great. A 0-0 draw against Memphis is fine, especially Memphis being a home playoff team. And the win against Lou City I think was rather shocking. So I think you can make a case. I'm not sure.
Agreed relative to the refereeing in that one, but yeah.
But I mean, a win is a win. 3 points is 3 points, and that's what matters on the table, right? And so I think there is a case you can make for Hartford sneaking in. I'm not so sure it can continue, but what a fun story would be, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I think this is kind of where I get into the more soccer romantic in me, and that I do think Hartford kind of gets into the postseason. And also I've already said that I am selling 2 teams currently in the postseason, so I need to get 2 teams that are not there yet to get into the postseason. But yeah, this is a Hartford Athletic team who's only made the playoffs once in their history, and that was during a COVID-shortened year where they exited the first round against St. Louis FC at the time, and that was a 1-0 result. So they still haven't even scored a playoff goal in their club history. I think this is just I don't expect them to do much if they do get into the postseason, but I think it's a good story that I'm willing to back Hartford to get in.
I like it. I think that they are not quite, I don't know, they just lack a certain zhuzh. They lack a certain trustworthiness when I watch them play. Yes, they're getting the goals from Dieng, but this is very much a team that has to do it on the counterattack. There is no other way that they're going to break you down. The defense has been good, but it's a little bit suspect, and they've relied on Henan Ribeiro having an unbelievable goalkeeping season. Like the best goalie in the league comfortably if you look at the advanced numbers. I just don't think it comes together in the end for them. So sorry there to Hartford. And we've got one more team to cover, North Carolina FC in 11th place. Coming up this season after the League One title, having their flashes, but fresh off of a game where they struggled over the weekend after a bad red card. So North Carolina, quick thoughts on them.
I would be happy if they made it, but I'm not sure. They do have a favorable run in, but I'm not completely sold on this team putting together a run that's good enough to get them where they want to go. They do have multiple games in hand on the groups in front of them, but not in front of Loudon. So maybe too big of a hill to climb. although it's only 4 points on paper. Uh, yeah, I'm holding on them missing out on the playoffs.
Sure.
Yeah, I think North Carolina's in a kind of a tricky spot. If you look at their remaining schedule, they have 4 road games left, and they've only won 2 games away from home all season. They're one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference right now away from home. Even if you look at their recent form, they've scored 9 goals over their last 5 games, and they've only come away with 1 victory in that time. I'm not sure there's how many teams you can say that about, and they've been shut out in 3 of those games. I'm not sold that North Carolina is going to make it into the postseason. I think they're going to really push it towards the final day. It just kind of depends on which North Carolina team wants to show up on their day. But ultimately, this inconsistency is going to cost them, and it won't result in a playoff spot.
This is the team for me where, probably against my better judgment, I'm buying in. I'm going to say that North Carolina gets into the playoff field. Part of it is the schedule. Like, they've got Indy, they've got Birmingham, they've got Hartford on the slate down the stretch. Especially if they beat Indy 11, given who I'm picking to drop out of the playoffs. Like, that could be the thing that the definition of a real 6-pointer, the game that galvanizes them and gets them in. They've got to avoid the red card issue. They've had 2 games in pretty recent vintage where they've had a man sent off in the first 5 minutes of the match. If that happens again at any point, they might be doomed. But I don't know. I think that the high line they play is good. I love watching Alex Anderson play. There's something about North Carolina that makes me want them to get in. So let's move west, and I'm going to frame it with a little bit more of a tight look here. Sacramento, New Mexico, they're in. Colorado Springs, pretty much the same deal. I kind of think, given that if you're looking at that Memphis, Las Vegas, Oakland group, all of them are at least 7 points ahead of Phoenix Rising. I think the top 6 are pretty much a done deal. So that leaves us with Tulsa, or rather, no, I'm looking at expected points. That leaves us with Phoenix in 7th right now, Orange County in 8th, Tulsa in 9th, San Antonio 10th, and Monterey 11th. So I want to look at those 5 teams. And again, sorry to El Paso, you're bad. We're not going to talk about you. And pick 2 playoff spots from those 5 teams. So we'll start with the defending champs, Phoenix Rising, who are back in the playoffs for now. But do we think they're going to stay there?
They have the most games remaining of any team currently within this group of 5. And if you look across the entire league, only Sacramento still has 26 games left. So just from sheer numbers, they have the most opportunities to pick up points between now and the end of the season. What's very crucial for Phoenix here is their next 2 games are in essence 6-pointers against San Antonio and Orange County. And then you have Monterey Bay looming in a few weeks' time as well. I think just simply based off of the sheer number of games they have left, Phoenix gets in. One thing that I will say is a little bit interesting is their last 8 games have all been under 2.5 goals. So they're a frustrating team to go in and play against. And I think they get over the line and lock into this 7th spot.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think just by I don't say sheer luck, but sheer numbers, and then who they happen to play. I think they're going to run into a few games where they're going to get some points against those teams at the bottom or against teams below the playoff line. And Phoenix isn't the awe-inspiring team of the past, but I do think there are elements there that are going to allow them to get enough points to at least make the playoffs. So I'm buying Phoenix staying in.
Yeah, I mean, they've got the least games played in the league. That matters because they've got more tries to just pick up any points that they can get. We've been quite critical of Phoenix, rightly, at points this season, but I think that they figured it out in terms of the system, the formation, and the players. Like, the use of Emil Cuejo as this left back who steps up like a center mid has been inventive and very effective. The signing of Jerome Garitha on the left wing kind of has changed the outlook of how I consider Phoenix. Like, he feels like he's going to be a star in this league, just given the small sample size. Won't belabor the point. I think Phoenix stays in. So then Orange County, who's really been a yo-yo on the bubble, sitting 8th right now. That may also just be FOTMOB stable because the tiebreakers are dumb and bad in the USL. But we'll take Orange County first. Do we think they're staying in the playoff field?
I haven't been in love with OC all season. Yeah, I think if I was, putting money on it, like legitimately buying and selling, I would sell Orange County at this point. I'm not in love. I think sometimes their wins kind of cover up, like I'm painting over cracks, if you will. Like they're going to be covered up for a little bit, but there's still issues underneath. They have some nice pieces that can maybe support a run to keep them in playoffs, but I'm not sold. Their defense has been kind of an issue all season. 42 goals allowed. Is that the second worst? Yeah, they've allowed more goals than El Paso, and so I think that just kind of paints a picture of
Somehow Oakland is like a playoff look, and they've given up the most goals in the conference. That's wild.
Yeah, right? Like that's not. First of all, that's not the team I would have chosen, and second of all, the fact that they're in the playoffs where they are, yeah, it's wild. But I think there's some issues there in Orange County, and as sad as it is to see that team where they are, I think unfortunately I'm selling them.
Yeah, Orange County, don't let the win over Rhode Island, kind of paper over the cracks. They go into that game with 6 matches without a win, and if you look at the remaining 7 games, 6 of those are against the Western Conference, and of those 6 games against the Western Conference, 5 of those teams have already beaten Orange County this season, and they have Hartford on the final day at home, fortunately for them, and I think going into that match, Hartford may have a little bit more to play for than Orange County, just have that mentality. But if you just look at some of these remaining games that Orange County has and just whatever the reverse fixture was from it, I can't get on board with Orange County making the playoffs.
No, I tend to be with you there. I think the defense is a question. I think the consistency in front of net is a question. Depending on how much time Thomas Among can get down the stretch, he's somebody who I really rate and think can be a massive difference maker for this team. But there's also kind of this conflicting thing of Orange County gave the start to Pedro Guimaraes over the weekend, the 16-year-old. Bryce Jamison, who's been fantastic, is getting minutes every single game. We've seen a lot of Ben Norris. There is an impetus that Orange County might just say, hey, we're playing the kids for better, for worse. And I think that's noble, but it might hurt them in the end. So I'm selling, unfortunately, on Orange County. FC Tulsa is who I want to talk about next. They're just weird. They're inconsistent. They went on a good defensive run. They've kind of cooled off. Do we think Tulsa is the team to get in and get that second spot left in the West?
I was going to choose a different team to buy, but I'm not sure based on their schedule if that's going to happen. So, if I'm selling Orange County, I'm probably buying Tulsa as the one team that's outside that's going to get in. I'm not comfortable with it, but I do think, they have some opportunities to pick up some points, and I think at this point in that part of the Western Conference, a couple wins might be enough to sneak you into a playoff spot. And I think Tulsa has some opportunities to actually get some wins. Current form, they play Colorado Springs. We've already talked about Phoenix, Vegas, and Lou City. So, they played some tough teams, but they're going to play some teams that aren't as tough. And I do think they have some opportunities to pick up some points. And I think that they're the team I'm going to buy if I'm selling Orange County.
Yeah, I'm with you, Alan. If you're looking at these 3 remaining teams, Tulsa, San Antonio, Monterey Bay, honest to God, I wasn't convinced about any of these 3 teams, and Tulsa just to me just kind of fell to my lap and just said, it's okay, you're the least bad option out of these 3. If you look at Tulsa, 4 of their remaining 7 games are at home, but they're the second worst home team in the Western Conference this year. They'll play Monterey Bay at home. In fact, their final 3 games of the year are at home. They'll play Monterey Bay on the final day, which I think could be very huge if Monterey Bay were to somehow reverse fortune on this current winless run they're on. So I think just from a lack of other good options, I'll reluctantly buy Tulsa, and New Mexico will have a fairly easy first round matchup.
New Mexico and Tulsa actually played pretty recently.
Oh yeah, they had that
it was
3-3.
like a shootout draw. Yeah. Well, Tulsa was going to be my pick, but I'm going to be contrarian just because I don't want us all to agree. I do think arguing for Tulsa, Diogo Pacheco has been awesome on the left wing. Getting Edwin Lasso back in the pivot is really the big deal. Their form tanked when he was out of the lineup. He was able to cameo off the bench against Lou City. He's probably one of the most underrated signings of the offseason this year for my taste, like an excellent destroyer in the midfield. And you look at their schedule compared to Monterrey and compared to San Antonio, it's friendly. So I see that. If I'm arguing against, like, the defense really has been struggling lately. I know they only conceded once against Lou City, but they gave up a number of chances. If Johan Peñaranda gets off of his heater level of form at any point, they could really be in trouble. So let's talk San Antonio, a team that has kind of felt like a hospital at times this season, just given the number of injuries. I'll preface this by saying that I just looked at their schedule and it was like I got the 1,000-yard stare because they've got Sacramento, they've got Colorado Springs, they've got Louisville City left. So I know where you guys are going, but do you think San Antonio is going to get in?
So, John, you just vocalized my thought process, like when you were like, which one in the West? I was like, oh, I think I'm going to go San Antonio. I think it's a nice pick. They have a decent run. They're bad, but they're not terrible. Like, and then I looked at that schedule and I was like, oh, that's going to be tough. But I mean, I think if you're looking at some of these teams that might have positions locked up, and so you might not be playing a full-fledged team toward the end of the season, or you might playing a rotated squad, that you might be able to sneak out points. And we're talking about, razor's edge here at the bottom of the West, like playing Lou City at home in October, that might not be as terrible of a match as it might have been mid-season, right? You're getting Sacramento at home as well, Detroit at home as well at the last game. Like there is a very good argument, John, that if you pick San Antonio as your buy, that's a smart buy because you're buying in the bet that some of these teams might not be as good or might not play their full strength, especially if they're traveling or they have something locked up and they'd rather not, get a guy hurt the last game of the season. So, I see that argument. But I was just like, I think Tulsa's got an easier run. And so I'm just looking at just sheer points. So I do think there is an argument for San Antonio getting in, if I want to, not steal all of your arguments. But I think there is a very real possibility that San Antonio can. They have the pedigree, but how San Antonio would it be? It'd be old school San Antonio to finish just out of the playoffs again with a decent squad. So I think maybe old school San Antonio is back again, unfortunately. But I'm not buying them, but I do think there's a case to be bought.
Yeah, I'm with you, Alan. I think there is certainly a case to be made here that San Antonio could very well find themselves into the postseason. If we're looking at the current points right now, they're level on points with Orange County, who is currently occupying a postseason spot, and they have a great opportunity to state their case with a match away at Phoenix this weekend. If you're going to look at just goal differential of these teams that we're all comparing, only Phoenix is the one that's better. And then you look at Orange County, Tulsa, and Monterey Bay, who all have double-digit goal differentials. I think there's certainly a case to be made. There's a path that you could see. If you're looking at San Antonio, they've only lost one of their last 5 games. Only Phoenix could boast a similar kind of run of form in their last 5. I don't think it'll be enough to get them over the edge, but I think there is at least a case.
Well, they're my pick. I think that San Antonio is getting into the playoffs. If you look at them, they haven't given up more than a single goal in a game since August 3rd. Like, the defense has figured it out and then some. They've added Omar Gray on loan from Houston Dynamo, a player who I think is really going to impress people at right back. Crucially, having Lucho Soliniak up at striker once again after his recovery from injury has mattered immensely. He's really the first player who's done actual number 9 striker things this season, and San Antonio has sorely lacked that. When you get him in the mix, probing, pushing defenses back, it allows Juan Agudalo's hold up to pay off more effectively. It allows Jorge Hernandez to find more space. And I thought Hernandez was resplendent over the weekend in the win they got against Oakland, like completely dominated that game, tore on the counter. It feels repeatable for them that even though they're coming up against one of the hardest schedules remaining, I think they've got the tools and got the ideas and just enough of the health, honestly, to do the job. So it's going to be tough, but San Antonio's my guy.
Yeah,
So
I think them getting a bunch of home games in this run-in is going to be helpful as well. They're not old San Antonio where it was impossible to win there, but they're still, if you just took home games, they're a playoff team at home. If you just count the home games. So I do think there is a pathway for it, and I think getting a lot of those teams at home might end up being what pushes them over as a pretty decent squad at home.
Yeah, so now it's time to eulogize Monterey Bay, who we all think are not going to make the playoffs. I'll just start by saying, I think this team is demonstrably worse than the competitors. The coaching change hasn't really proved to be inspiring. The players that they're starting in the midfield are often kind of inexperienced. Lord knows I love Xavi Nati doing his thing in the midfield, but in a tight-knit playoff race, given who they're going to be coming up against, him next to another rookie, next to a kind of number 8 miscast as a defensive mid, that's not what you want to see in the midfield. And given that Tristan Treger has been hurt for so much of the year and is only just getting back to health, I think I'm in on Monterey's future for next season once they've got an off season to kind of build up under Jordan Stewart. But I think 2024 they're done for.
Yeah, they're the of the teams we talked about, they're the teams that have played the most games, one more than any of the other teams, and I do think that matters, right? They're a couple points behind, and with everyone else has got a game in hand. So this could separate pretty quickly when those games get caught up. A gap that looks somewhat close can be something a little bit less manageable without even playing a game. So yeah, I'm not super sold on Monterey. Xavi was great in San Diego when he was here, but he was surrounded by a lot of really good pieces that supported his ability to play. And so I think he will. This is probably a good developing for him to be put in a position of having to play without all of those huge supportive pieces. But yeah, I think I like some of the players, but I don't like the players together and the product that they're putting out consistently. So yeah, I think they're not El Paso, but they're pretty close to being done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna obviously sell Monterey Bay as well. They're entering this match weekend winless in the last 9. It's been 73 days since they last won a game, ironically enough, against Pittsburgh back in the middle of July. But yeah, it's not working for Monterey Bay right now. They haven't scored a goal since August 17th. I don't see this form getting turned around at any time soon. And at this point, it's getting to a stage where when they play Sacramento and Colorado Springs back to back in the third to final and second to final match day, I think by the time they play Colorado Springs, their fate will be sealed. So I am selling Monterey Bay.
Fair. Okay. So, I mean, realistically, all of us are saying bye-bye to Orange County and into FC Tulsa. But interesting races on both sides. Cannot wait for what's about 40 days remaining, give or take, of the regular season. So before we get into picks, any other stray USL thoughts to get out there? All right. So we're going to start with what is undeniably the game of the week. The only thing on the schedule for tomorrow night, New Mexico hosting Sacramento, a game that's going to go a long way to deciding the top of the West. We will start with you, Ryan, with pick.
Yeah, I've picked Sacramento to win this one. I think them still wanting to push towards the top of the Western Conference, and the fact that they now have Colorado Springs level on points with them and Memphis right on their heels is going to motivate Sacramento to come out and get a victory away from home in this one. So I've picked the Republic, who are winners of 3 of their last 4.
Yeah, and then with their run, and I'm not super convinced New Mexico is the same New Mexico they were early in the season. They do have, they have a decent run, but maybe not the most impressive soccer being played. So I think Sacramento comes away with this one.
Yeah, clean sweep with the Sacramento picks here. Not to disrespect New Mexico, but I think Sacramento just has another gear. I think that the way Russell Cicerone has played since his return is going to give this team fits. New Mexico tried this weird thing where they were like playing a back 3 half the time in Detroit. They're not going to do that again against a team as good as the Republic, but I think it shows that, I don't know, are they a little unconfident right now? So, hey, yeah, Sacramento getting the win. We've got another big matchup in the East as we move along to the weekend slate, with Charleston taking on Tampa Bay. Last time these teams met was the game, I believe, where Aaron Malloy went down injured partway through, and the Rowdies got the big comeback, punctuated by Nate Worth's free kick. So how do we think that the return fixture is going to play out, Ryan?
Yeah, I've gone with Charleston winning this one. If you look historically through this series history, the home team has really always had the advantage here. And when Charleston hosts the series, more often than not, they always walk away with the win. The last time that Tampa Bay went into Charleston and came away with the win was in October of 2021 when the second Venom movie had just came out. I think Charleston, having clinched the playoff spot and wanting to ensure that there is no chance of Tampa Bay catching up to a gap, not even providing them a 7-point cushion rather than what could be a 13-point cushion, I am backing the Battery to win this one.
Yeah, I went, as a motorcycle drives by, I went with a slightly different approach in that I know how John picked as well, and I went slightly contrarian. I think maybe Rowdies build on the emotional win and make this a slightly more interesting race. I don't think they're going to catch Charleston, but I think they maybe have a little bit of a bounce going into this one and maybe pull out a victory. So I went with the Rowdies win.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're getting ahead of me here, but I just went with the draw. I think these teams are pretty evenly matched. I think the X factor here is Malloy. Like, he was on the bench 2 weeks ago when the Battery had a home game. He didn't play. He didn't travel to Colorado Springs. He's the X factor for this team over the weekend, for this team for the rest of the season. It's going to be a low scoring game, I think. I think the Battery defense is going to show up big in this one and keep it to a draw. We move back west again with Phoenix Rising hosting San Antonio FC in a game that is rich with playoff implications. We will start again with you, Ryan.
Yeah, I have picked Phoenix in this one, and it goes back earlier that I was saying that I'm buying Phoenix. I think they're going to maintain their playoff spot, especially with this being a massive 6-point game within this contest. What's interesting to me is that Phoenix, through their last 8 home games, are unbeaten in that time. You have to go all the way back 154 days ago to April 20th to find the last time Phoenix lost a game at home, and that was against Pittsburgh. And I just think the home crowd is going to carry Phoenix into a win.
Yeah, and I agree. I know San Antonio's had Phoenix's number in the most recent matchups that they played. San Antonio's been, I think they've won 2 of the last 3. But I think this is a turning point maybe for Phoenix this season where we're building back good form. We know we can punch down at San Antonio to keep them kind of below the playoff line. And so I think as much as this might not feel like a rivalry game, I think this is one that I think Phoenix wants to put a a flag in to say like, hey, we're back, we're a playoff team.
Yeah, I mean, one segment later, I'm going to expose myself as being kind of an idiot because I've got Phoenix winning this game and like dooming San Antonio's playoff hopes. I just think that Phoenix, like I was saying earlier, has figured things out. Even without Charlie Dennis against Sacramento, they felt like they had a level of control in the midfield that we just haven't seen. That didn't pay off against Sacramento, but it's the positive progress you want if you're not Danny Stone, good Lord, if you're Diego Gomez running Phoenix Rising. So as much as I like what San Antonio is doing, I'm here for the momentum of Phoenix, and I've got them getting the win. Sunday, then, we've got a triple header of games actually on Sunday. I love a bit of variety in the schedule. And I think the highlight there is Detroit City hosting Louisville. So we are picking that one and starting with Ryan.
Yeah, so this game will be on ESPN2. It's a really great showcase for the league. Great opportunity to get on the national broadcast and within one of the best stadiums within the league. And it's a stadium that Louisville have not won in since August 2022. But Detroit has only beaten Louisville once all time, and that was back in July 2023, also a home match. However, I think Louisville is going to really kind of kick on with their form this remaining part of the season, and they'll get the win here.
Yeah, I agree. I'm locking this one. I think this is, I know Louisville City's already locked up a playoff spot, but I think, to continue their good run of form, but also to kind of solidify that we're the best team in the East, and to strike some fear into the rest of the Eastern Conference. Like going into Detroit City and getting a win is always a good notch. It's a skin to hang up on the wall, if you will. And so I think Lou City realizes that this is an opportunity to do that, and they pull out a win.
I just think Louisville is a machine right now. As much as I have been impressed with Detroit's ability to kind of win close games and keep it tight, they feel overmatched in this matchup. Louisville City executes in a way that they, even given the context, given Keyworth, given it all, I think Louisville is just the better side. So, like you, Alan, I am walking a win for Louisville. And then one more game from League One. I think a very good matchup, kind of two top of the table sides, with Union Omaha playing host, fresh off Union Omaha, fresh off that big win against Hailstorm, taking on one Knox. So, Ryan, finish us off.
Yeah, so across all competitions right now, Knoxville has been unbeaten in 11 games. I know Omaha had the heartbreaker against Northern Colorado in the Jägermeister Cup, but then they got their revenge on Northern Colorado on the weekend. I think just if you look at the historical context of this game, Knoxville has still yet to beat Omaha in their 4 all-time meetings, and I think that trend continues. And it will be Omaha dispatching of Knoxville's unbeaten run, and they'll extend their lead atop the League One standings.
Yeah, I was leaning one Knox for a minute, and then I think I remember every time I pick against Omaha, they win, and then I get mad. I was like, I should have picked Omaha. And so now I'm picking Omaha, and maybe one Knox fans will be happy. So that's where I am going.
One Knox played probably one of the weirder games of the week where they were down a man for more than 70 minutes against Lexington, and they won because Lexington. They're not going to be as lucky against an Omaha team that is so well drilled under Dom Casciato. I think that Omaha has the dribblers, the creators in good areas to kind of break a very good defensive one Knox team down. Like you can imagine Lagos Kunga doing damage on the wing and forcing them to break structure in a way that pays off. So, yeah. And I tend to be an Omaha homer anyway. I like watching that team play. So, going Union Omaha. All right, so that's the extent of the picks. Anything else? One last call on USL thoughts? If not, let's end on the usual fun note. Alan, anything catching your eye? Anything you've been watching? Just general ideas coming to the end of the show?
Yeah, I'm gonna expose my middle-aged white guy and say we're gonna go check out Ben Folds' part of his tour on Thursday. he does. It's called the Paper Airplane Tour, and if you haven't seen it, it's super awesome. He plays like a half a set, 3/4 of a set, and then he leaves, and the fans throw paper airplanes on the stage with requests, and then he just walks around the stage, picks up a paper, opens it up, and if he likes it, he plays it. And there are things like old school songs where he pulls out a notebook and plays, like he has the music there and he plays it. Some of it's just improvised on the spot. Like last time we went and saw, he had the audience do like 3-part harmonies with him while he made up a song. And it's a super cool vibe. It's just him and a piano. It's super great. And then his tour also supports his one of his initiatives of bringing keyboard instruments to underserved people. I think it's in a specific city. I have to Google it again, but I love me some Ben Folds, and so we're gonna go check that out on Thursday and throw a paper airplane on stage.
That's awesome, man. That sounds like a great time. Ryan, anything for you?
Yeah, it's fun.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not much coming from my perspective. It's been dumping a lot of rain on the Carolinas over the past week. I had to drive 500 miles last weekend, and part of that was in the rain. And then we've been dealing with a tropical storm that had just pushed through the Carolinas as well. So I haven't been able to run as much, but I did get a run in today. So hoping for just better weather going through the rest of the week.
You ever a rain runner?
No, I'm an avid runner, but that is the one line that I just can't cross. I don't like running in the rain. It's not the most pleasant thing. If it's misting or spritzing outside, I'll run in that. But if it's like actually pouring rain, it just feels miserable.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, well, today I am rocking a custom ink shirt with the Pedro Charleston raccoon on it, and I cannot believe that Ben Clemens, this is the one time he's not in the chat repping the battery. So I feel like that's sort of cosmic, I don't know what, coming at me. So yeah, sad about that. And then, boy, I've probably shouted out Rings of Power already this season, but I'm loving Rings of Power. Like, it's for some reason somewhat divisive amongst the Lord of the Rings diehards, but I don't know. I'm just here for kind of epic storytelling with dwarves and elves. So I'm a simple man, and that's what I like. All right. Well, thank you to everybody who came into the live chat. Thank you to everybody who is listening in podcast form, probably tomorrow after the time we're recording this. Come again next week where we've got Eamon Zayed live. We're working on guests relative to Forward Medicine, and we'll let you know about that when it comes to fruition. But until then, we will give you Alan's voice.
Thank you for watching another episode of the USL Show.
The USL Show is now proudly part of the Protagonist podcast family. Please go to protagonistsoccer.com to check out more work. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see everyone again next time.